Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's episode. I'm joined today by Brad Power and Ari Akerstein, founders of the Cancer Hacker Lab. This is going to be a really interesting conversation, very different from some of the ones that I've been having, because as Ari and Ari and Brad will describe, they actually run an accelerator program, but it has a bit of a different twist to it. So, guys, how you doing today? Brad, you good?
Good, thanks.
Yeah,
We're
Ari.
good. Good to be here.
And you guys are in Cambridge, right? Boston, Cambridge.
Plus or minus. Recent transplant from the Bay Area. Close
Okay,
enough.
good, good. Well, let's jump in here. Maybe, again, I don't know who wants to take the lead here, but if you could just tell us a little bit about Cancer Hacker Lab. How did you sort of conceive the idea? What's your mission? Just give us some background on it.
Sure.
Okay, I'll start. The Cancer Patient Lab, which is the logo, behind me here, is a learning community for cancer patients, which got launched several years ago. We run a weekly webinar series for patients and caregivers who are trying to figure out how to navigate cancer. And I've always felt that the way to accelerate innovation is to have informed, educated consumers who would early adopt new things and to have startups that offer them new things. Given my consulting background, working with large organizations, they're very slow to innovate, or actually they're constitutionally designed not to innovate. So if you want to get change fast, and we're both cancer survivors, if you want to get change fast, the way to do it is through educated patients demanding new things and through startups which are designed to disrupt the system and the status quo. So the accelerator was the place where we could help startups be successful at disrupting the status quo. And the Cancer Patient Lab is where patients can get educated so they can understand what would be the best things for them.
Interesting. So that the Cancer Patient Lab came first?
Yes.
Gotcha. And then the Hacker Lab grew out of sort of like a need, I guess, right?
In an interesting way, I can add a little more context, but I think the observation, we're both cancer survivors, is that the pace of adoption, we're talking facts and paper, it's glacial. And really what we think about basically every day, all the time, through whether it's through the Cancer Patient Lab or the accelerator, is how do we actually, we think of it like bending the curve. And so it's kind of like going to be a linear adoption of technology from the incumbents, hospital systems, what have you, and patients can't wait for those innovations to actually make it to the forefront of care, whatever that looks like. And so we really think about it as bringing together two groups of people. We have on the one side consumer tech kind of people who are used to moving fast, and on the other side, the scientists, clinicians. And so what we found is kind of playing at that intersection of those two groups has been a pretty fruitful endeavor, and that's where the accelerator actually operates. And so what we're trying to do is really help founders who are aimed at actually building better solutions for cancer patients, because that's sort of the anchor point. How do we actually help them traverse this minefield of regulatory and like scientific things, and how do clinicians think, and putting that all together in a way that helps them actually be more effective.
Great, great. So I know in talking to you, you're taking a bit of a contrarian direct-to-consumer approach here, which is, again, quite a bit different. Ari, I know that's sort of your background. Why don't you give us a little bit of the color on, how and why you kind of have that perspective?
Yeah, so I think that the conventional wisdom that direct to consumer is wrong hard. I think that's true, but I think there's enough indicators that suggest that maybe that conventional wisdom is outdated. We think that patients have changed. On the one hand, you see Dr. Google, it's kind of a known thing. Now it's Dr. ChatGPT or whatever the latest LLM models actually are. And so we think that today's patients, especially those that are dealing with more advanced cancers, like are in the Cancer Patient Lab, that they are not passive recipients of care. They're not open to that. I think they're frustrated. You see it in outcomes, you see it in gaps, disparities. And so the traditional healthcare system is optimized for billing codes, not patient outcomes. And so we think that the way to actually deliver better, more patient-centric solutions is not by getting a B2B2C or selling into a provider group. What I have seen in this space is that if you're getting paid over here and building ostensibly over here for patients, ultimately when things get hard and you're making trade-off decisions, you're going to go in the direction of where you get paid, and that creates really interesting incentives that we think are maybe not in the patient's best interest in the long term. And so we think that direct to consumer is maybe hard and maybe a philosophical stance, but we actually think that it's the way to build trust with patients. And the reason for that is that the onus is on us to provide a value exchange that's actually worth paying for. One final thing that I'll say is that we have this notion that patients don't pay, but they actually do. They pay in time, emotional overhead, suboptimal decisions. And so I think part of the onus that we're taking on ourselves is to actually make that case that there is a value exchange there worth paying for. And maybe there's a reframe that needs to happen to make that true. But we think that building for trust is actually quite a lot harder and more meaningful than building for a payer code or a B2B model.
Right, right. So how do you do that then? How do you build for trust?
That is a a very big question.
Yeah.
And let me actually just say that I think that not only is it the right thing to do, like from a patient standpoint and from a principal standpoint, our conviction, and it could be wrong, by the way, like there's a long road of failed companies that have tried to go direct to consumer. It is not an easy way to go. But we actually think that something Brad and I talk about a lot is in a world where we see commoditization happening on almost every front, on the labor front, on a knowledge front. We have software engineers now saying that my job's going to be gone in, next year, which is crazy. Nobody would have predicted that, maybe even a year ago. And where do you backstop? And I think that our belief is that you backstop on trust. And so not only is it sort of like a good principle in general, but we actually think in aggregate, kind of over the long term, that engendering patient trust by doing the right thing and putting the patient in the center is the right thing for patients, for outcomes, but also for longer term business. We'll see whether that proves to be true, but that's our belief system right now.
Let me just add, at the risk of being unfair to existing incumbents in the system, all of the incumbents in the health system have their own selfish objectives that are not in the interest of the patients. And well, 80 or 90% of the time that isn't an issue, we see the issues where it is an issue. So just to give a few examples, if you're being treated in Boston at Dana-Farber and Mass General across the road has a different clinical trial in your area, are you going to find out about it? Maybe not, because maybe they want to keep you in-house. If you're looking at choices that a pharmaceutical company might make, they're going to decide for optimizing their profitability, which may not be in the best interest of patients. I'll give you an example. There was a company developing a new drug that was going to be very toxic. And so they developed a companion diagnostic that would tell which patients would respond to the drug or not. They then found that it was not going to be as toxic as they thought it was going to be, so they got rid of the companion diagnostic, even though the companion diagnostic would show that, let's say, 40% of patients would benefit from the drug and 60% would not. So they were maximizing their profitability. I could probably come up with, things that insurance companies do to reduce their costs that are not, well, we don't have to go very far to see the lack of trust that people have in insurance companies.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm referring to.
Sure.
So, there's a lot of distrust in the system today. And so any organization that was 100% dedicated with no conflicts of interest, so they're being paid directly by the patient, there's nothing else that they're trying to do than serve that patient. All of the money that comes in is from those patients. Then we're 100% aligned on getting good outcomes for patients. Anything else is got risks, and we might even call corruption.
Right, right. Interesting. So next question here. Is there an ideal profile for companies in your accelerator to consider? Again, this more direct to consumer approach.
Yeah,
Yeah.
happy to take that. So I think first and foremost, the business model is somewhat of a new one, or direct to consumer obviously exists, but pointing it toward patients is a slightly new application. Maybe it's swimming upstream against the grain. And so I think you first and foremost need to care about patients. You need to really be living and thinking about this problem space all the time. So first and foremost, like, you care deeply about the problem space that you're working in. And so you look at somebody like Brad, he is living it, breathing it, like 24/7. And you need to care. And not only because that's what you're focusing on, but also because you need to figure out how that business model is actually going to work. So you're not just building a better mousetrap, you're actually kind of inventing what that business model is. And so there might be a obsessiveness, might be a good word for maybe founders that do well. And again, that's just like you really care about this problem space enough to make the connections to figure out what's actually going to work.
Almost all the founders have, we call them missionaries, not mercenaries. Almost all of them have been touched by cancer. They have a story of a loved one themselves who went through a bad experience, and they're sort of, I don't want anybody to have to go through that experience again. So we need to change the way the system works.
Yeah, that's right. And I think the other aspect is that you may have a new technology or a new application of a technology or a new science. And so that, again, like I was describing earlier, that intersection between, let's call it consumer tech, consumer science, and actual science, clinical life sciences, putting those two things together and being willing maybe to learn a new language. If you're a clinician, learning the language of consumer product. And similarly, folks that are coming from more of a Silicon Valley background, actually digging in and connecting with clinicians. Like, these are, we're trying to make it less oil and water, but these are languages that are somewhat mutually exclusive from one another. And so we're trying to bring those a bit more closer in harmony so that you can leverage the best of both worlds and actually be successful.
Cool. Let's talk about the experience of whatever I don't know if we call it the entrepreneur or the participant that's going through your accelerator. So you mentioned, and I see this a lot when I interview people, that typically, they may be an MD or a PhD, a scientist, and whatever they have, whatever a concept in mind that they're trying to commercialize, or you have a technologist, right, that has a concept, and you mentioned that, Ari. Tell us just a little bit about, like when they come into the accelerator, like whatever, like tell us about the journey that they take and that you take them on.
The first thing to mention is that we are focusing on diagnostics and navigation and not therapies. So the tried and true investment area is for therapeutics. Like, if you get a blockbuster drug, you can create $1 billion of value. And so there's a lot of money that pours into trying to find that gold mine. But we're focused on the side, which is almost taking all those therapies as a given and then figuring out, from a patient's point of view, which one's the best one for me. And in order to do that, you need big data and analytics, right? You need to have some kind of matching process, and you need to add data to personalize things. So the more data you have about yourself, whether that's your unique biomarkers, whether it's your medical history, your family history, all that data can help personalize your treatments. So we're looking for startups that are helping patients either gather that data to personalize their treatment, or to then, having gotten all that data, navigate to the best treatment for them.
Gotcha.
That's right. I can add a few pieces to that, which is, we in Q4 last year, we sort of kicked this thing off as an experiment. And the experiment was, can we add value at this intersection that we've been describing throughout? And and what we found, it was almost like a 12-week sort of, or 12 experiments. Every week, a new experiment. Will this be valuable? Will that be valuable? And what we landed on was that there were a few vectors that were pretty specific about where we were adding value. On the one hand, it was, let's call it the founder circle, CEO circle, something like this, where what you do is get founders together, sharing their knowledge, sort of their loneliness is lonely at the top is a common refrain. And we found that that was powerful, not only on kind of emotional level and, for all the reasons that you would think, commiseration, but actually tactically in terms of, let's see, we had 13 companies come through, and we had, Brad, keep me honest, what, 3 partnerships, something on that number emerging. And the reason is that it's almost like the Kevin Bacon number, except it's not like 6 degrees or whatever it is, 6 degrees. It's like 1 or 2. And so what you find is that because we're operating in a fairly constrained, like narrow perimeter, actually you're only 1 degree away from probably the right person in the world that you need to talk to. And so we found just a lot of leverage there, kind of that serendipitous. You're going to get like interesting connections if you put everybody in a small enough perimeter. So that was interesting, kind of the founder circle thing. The other thing that we found was, let's call it workshops or deep dive kind of experiences. And so it's not like a seminar, but rather like a going deep. And so we did like, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 versions of this, from building with AI tools. How do you do that? What does that look like? All of this, I should say, pulling in our advisors. So we have kind of an embarrassment of riches on that front. And so we pull them in and they help kind of guide people and teach in a hands-on way how to do X, whether it's build a better pitch deck, build with AI tools, do a design sprint. We did one with an advisor who's pretty senior at Google on UX. And so that kind of thing. And just like, again, that we don't speak the language over here, help equip me with how to think about doing X. And so we found that that was a very useful value add sort of activity. And so the final thing that I'll say is that we started from like a batch mode, just because that's how you're supposed to do these things. And we're actually shifting more to, we call ourselves an accelerator, but I think maybe a builder community or something in that, we're in the midst of a rebrand. So that'll be coming soon. But I think like builder community, founder community is probably more right, where we're coming together and there's a collaborative aspect to this, not a zero sum. We're trying to lift the tide in service of patients. So it's a flavor of what it looks like.
Cool. And are most companies like pre-commercial, or like at what stage are they when they come into you?
Yeah, they tend to be on the earlier side, as you would imagine, given that we're going against the grain, direct to consumer, and more focused on diagnostics. And I don't know that is. That may be an artifact of us being new and just who we know. I don't know where we'll net out and how many big companies like this there are. We're actually starting to see some larger companies emerging in the direct to consumer space that are, I think, really interesting. And so we'll see. But I think I would say the average is they've raised 1 to 3 million, or maybe several 100,000. I think the biggest one was like 15 million. So kind of in that range, not unicorns, not, like Series B, like huge companies that are on a rocket ship trajectory. And I think that's okay. Like these may not be unicorn type of companies, and not everybody has to be. And I think that's a whole separate conversation about like what is happening in that landscape, but for another day.
What's been your experience, Brad, working with your portfolio founders?
They are often looking for money. They are often looking for a business model. And they're scrambling around trying to figure out how they can have a sustainable business model. And this is where we saw them going B to B to C. And so it's like What's the value proposition we would make for a provider? What's the value proposition we would make for pharma? Can you get us any introductions to people in provider organizations in pharma? And some of the advisors that Ari was referring to ran workshops on those sorts of things. You know, who are the buyers? What are their motivations? How would you sell into that environment? And the thing that we're also doing there for, since we've been talking a lot about direct to consumers, they can continue to do that. And then we can say, we can build you a direct to consumer channel that will be
Right.
complementary to what you're doing B2B2C. So you're going to, you know, have a cancer navigation tool that you'll sell to a hospital that will then provide it to its patients, or an employer that will provide it to their employees. And so we could go and just offer that same tool directly to consumers, whatever it might be. There's another thing that has been kind of surprising is that almost all of the companies are complementary. It's surprising the diversity, even though they're in the same space, they come up with different ideas for things that they might do, whether it's RNA expression or functional testing or all the things that surround what a cancer patient needs, whether they're physical, you know, like or other kinds of health. One was very active in patient-reported outcomes, like what's the patient experience and the tools for doing that. One was using AI to democratize education. So they were all very complementary. And so that means that, and they're also, I would say, in related to that, is they're also somewhat incomplete. Because if you're a patient, you want maybe a one-stop shop for all of those services. And so we can help those collaborations work, because some of those things would be one-time needs or features, but not something that is the place you would continue to go back to over a long period of time. And we're sort of trying to build that as well.
Right, right. So again, when you think about direct to consumer, I mean, obviously there's, you know, the sales and marketing aspect of it, but then there's the actual delivery of the care, right? So just tell me a little bit about that. I mean, what else, I guess, you need to be taken into consideration in a direct to consumer model that, you know, whatever.
I guess we should be clear that we're being very virtual and not physical. So we know many innovators who have ideas about how to come up with new care that are building clinics. And so, you know, places where people can physically go to. Now, it might be in Spain or, you know, someplace ex-US. But all of what we're doing is arming people with information, just to be very clear about that.
Yep.
So it's not medical care, but it's the information that allows people to make testing decisions, treatment decisions, and other decisions, you know, in the surround of being a cancer patient or caregiver.
Gotcha. So that's the diagnostic piece of it.
It's diagnostics, but the navigation is huge too. So,
also about that, because you had mentioned you had a chatbot. Is that something that you sort of enable across your portfolio, Brad? Or
that's an Ari question.
Yeah, Ari.
No, that is a independent us practicing what we preach, let's say. And so if we believe that, let's call it AI, tech enablement, et cetera, if we believe that that is the future and that direct to consumer is the future, I think maybe one of the other observations that we had was we love leading this building community and accelerator, but not if we're not kind of, you know, in the sandbox playing.
Sure.
Then it's just, you know, a little bit less fun. And so, yeah, so it's somewhat independent, although I will say that when it comes to navigation, we think there's a lot of opportunity. As there's been a common refrain here, which is that these business models are, you know, maybe challenging. They're not unicorns. You know, you're not getting hundreds of millions of dollars to take out in, you know, Facebook ads or whatever. And so distribution is a common challenge. Mm-hmm. And so how do you solve for that challenge in a world where you might, in sort of the lingo, you might say you have a lot of point solutions and there's sort of like no home for these point solutions as you have a world that's moving toward consolidation. So what do you do with these long tail, really good, really strong science, you know, that are like just, it's not a huge population. It might be a small market. What do you do with all these point solutions? And I think that, you know, one answer is, you know, you're trolling on a giant fishing boat and you just throw out the minnows. Yeah. And, you know, on the one hand, it might be, you know, there might be a minnow catcher on the other side that's saying, well, like it's protein, like there could be something there. And so distribution is a common challenge. And so we think that aggregating platforms for, again, anchored on trust, there could be something there. And so engendering partnerships, we've noticed that there's some interest in that. And so TBD where that goes, it's still kind of early days. But, I also think on the like chatbot idea, I don't really think of it so much as like chatbot as this notion of like intelligent co-pilot,
Yep.
one that speaks your language. Cancer isn't one disease, it's, very personalized. And so the idea of personalization actually, I think sometimes can be a gimmick and is a mechanic for doing better ad targeting. And like, that's fine. That's just not really what we're trying to do. We're pointing it toward, well, what is the best decision for you to make? What is the best diagnostic for you to get? What biomarker should I understand about such that I can, make a better decision? And so in talking with cancer patients, we find that there's like this, it's like sometimes the decisions you're making are playing checkers. And it's like, we sometimes think of it like 3D chess, where like, well, if I do that move, then it cuts off this other move in the future. And then, that drug is no longer an option. So how do we help people think through that? And so I think chatbot or AI is like a big part of that. But it's really like, I think the part about a chatbot is that it's reactive. I ask a question and then it gives me something back, but actually it's more like, how do you proactively say, like, help them understand, well, what question should I be asking? And this gets to a very important design principle that Brad and I think about is, how do you put humans in the loop? And again, anchoring on trust, but also on community. And I think that's something that the Cancer Patient Lab does incredibly well. And so if we can pull in a community of people, put guardrails on, the hallucinations that inevitably creep into these type of systems, is don't throw them out, but put the proper guardrails in place such that you can triangulate on whatever the right solution is in a personalized way for people. So yeah, that's a bit about that chatbot idea, but like separate and distinct in some way, but also, we're dog fooding our own product, so to speak.
Excellent. This has been a really informative interview, guys. I really appreciate it. So just one last, question here. So how do organizations get engaged with you? We talked about sort of like the profile of, an organization that might be a good fit. But what are some of the next steps? How do they get into your program, and then, what can they expect?
Yeah. I can take that. So best thing is, if you have show notes or anything like that, we can give you our website, cancerhackerlab.com for now until we rebrand it, but we'll have a redirect. So go there.
That brand.
We do too, but we'll see what comes of it.
Yeah.
You can email Brad and I directly, Brad or Ari at cancerhackerlab.com. And I think those are like the easiest ways to do it. You can reach out on LinkedIn or just hit up the website and, go to the homepage and shoot us a note.
Cool. Just one other thing I want to drill into a little bit. You had mentioned your advisory board. So I know you have an excellent advisory board that's on your website, but how do they get involved in working with your founders?
Brad, you want
to take this?
Okay. Well, we started with a simple notion, like if you look at the accelerator best practices, somebody like Y Combinator is going to have office hours, and there's advisor X, and they're available during these times. You book their time, you see them. So we started with that notion, but the matching is a little, there's overhead associated with it, and it's a little bit awkward. And so what we did instead, and what we're now institutionalizing, because that was one of the valuable areas, is through these workshops. So basically, we set the advisor up. By the way, advisors love this kind of situation. So almost every advisor we've approached has said yes, because it's very flattering to them to be seen as a mentor. And then we say, okay, here's the deal. You're going to run a workshop, and it's going to be an hour, hour and a half, whatever it is long. And the founders that are interested in the subject which you're about to talk about, which we've talked about a variety of topics, it could be how to improve your pitch deck, to how to approach these investors, to approaching as customers, providers, payers, and pharma. We're going to have a workshop on that. And then the people show up. And what we'll get better at in the future then is recording that for posterity. So if you can't show up when that session is happening, you can still get that body of knowledge available to you.
Excellent.
Yep.
Excellent.
So that's one. The other one is ad hoc requests tend to be undervalued, but incredibly powerful. And I'll give you an example. So we've had folks come through who have some burning question. I need to figure out how to get the one that came up was PIN codes, a way to not be practicing medicine, but getting paid through a provider, and someone needed to figure that out. And we just so happened to have, the right group of folks that, again, that constrained circle where, you're going to have people that know the right answer, and it becomes a routing problem. Okay, we've got these people in the network. How do we route it? Who do we go to get the right answer and not the wrong answer, very importantly, and do it as quickly as possible. And so we've just had quite a few examples of that kind of thing where within, 12 hours, 24 hours, you're on a meeting, you have the right answer, and it goes into your pitch deck so that, for your last minute pitch that came up. So things like that are more common than you would think, we find. And so that's another way, is just kind of this loose consortium of, knowledge people to connect with ad hoc for some burning question.
Cool. That must just save so much time and stress.
So much.
Yeah. Cool. Well, just in closing, Brad, maybe, what are one or two, sort of pearls of wisdom here that you would share with a founder that, is possibly considering your accelerator?
I don't know. It's a community of people that are trying to make a difference for patients and caregivers, direct to consumer, or at least focusing on it based on experiences, and trying to innovate also in how they get to market and how they get funded. So we're looking at non-traditional VC ways of getting funding as well. So it's about joining a community has sort of like-minded, but you're doing something that's complementary.
Cool. Ari, your perspective?
Right now, I've never felt like compounding. Like, we're not good at understanding compounding as people. And right now feels like we are in this compounding moment where, we're kind of eyeballs deep building a product, and just how the world has changed. And so I come from the world of like building technology product. And so you have an engineering team and you have all these other teams, and the speed at which you can build things now is astonishing. And so I think that, a lot of what we've been describing here has been, oh, direct to consumer is hard and patients don't pay and friction and this and that. And I actually think that is true, that has historically been true. I will be surprised if in, 3 years we have this podcast again, maybe much less, 1 year maybe.
Yep.
And something material has not shifted. And so I would be actually, while it's in the immediate term, maybe tricky, you have to figure out a bunch of things. I actually think that the bet I would place is that there is going to be much more patient centricity. And part of the reason for that is that we're seeing a leveling of the playing field where you're moving from this information asymmetry, the doctor has all the knowledge and I know nothing, to actually getting much better answers much more quickly. I uploaded a pathology report, to Claude 3.7, even a few weeks ago. It gave me a better answer in the space of 10 minutes, iterating back and forth than my primary oncologist gave me over weeks of wrangling. And that's only going to increase, get better, faster, cheaper. So that information asymmetry is getting leveled out. So I actually think right now is a super interesting time to be doing what we're doing. It's part of the reason that I think Brad and I are so energized by this is that, well, we don't know which direction it's going to go, but I think the bet is it's going more in this particular direction. And, as they say, the best way to predict the future is to create the future. So we hope that by creating this little ecosystem that it can turn into something more than a little ecosystem and, help bend that curve toward patients. So
Well,
that'd
anyway,
that'd be my wisdom for the moment.
well, congratulations on building something like really incredible. And, again, putting the patient at the center. Both of your personal stories are very inspiring, and just wish you all the best of success going forward. Thanks so much for this.
Thanks so much, Dario.
Thank you.
Bye.